Stanford's president and Stanford Law School's dean are now apologizing to a federal judge named Kyle Duncan. Duncan, who was appointed by President Trump, was recently ambushed by Stanford law students and the law school's diversity dean during a recent event. The event was called the Fifth Circuit in Conversation with the Supreme Court, COVID, Guns, and Twitter, a reference to some of the biggest cases that came before Judge Duncan's court. The protesters accused the judge of racism and threatening the rights of LGBTQ people, immigrants, black voters, and women. Now, we mentioned the law school's diversity dean. Her name is Tyrion Steinbach, and before Judge Duncan was allowed to speak, she read a long prepared statement and lectured the judge for causing, quote, pain and harm to Stanford students based on his decisions and just by being on Stanford's campus. Take a listen.
Your advocacy, your opinions from the bench land as absolute disenfranchisement of their rights and does land. Let me please, let me
Well, it was something else. Now, someone who knows a lot about law school is here to talk to us about what he and all of us just witnessed. Professor Alan Dershowitz, a Harvard Law School Professor Emeritus and a Newsmax analyst. You can also check out his new book called Get Trump, The Threat to Civil Liberties, Due Process, and Our Constitutional Rule of Law. Great to see you again, Professor.
Thank you.
Give us your take on what we just witnessed right there.
Well, this is a widespread problem, not only at Stanford Law School, at Yale Law School, at Georgetown Law School. I bet you I were invited by the Federalist Society to give a lecture on the Supreme Court at Harvard Law School, where I taught for 50 years. There'd be disruptions and there would be efforts to try to prevent me from speaking, even though I'm a liberal, Democrat, anti-Trump person. But because I defended Trump in front of the United States Senate and have taken views on race-based affirmative action different than the majority views on university campuses, they would probably try to shut me down as well. This is about free speech. This is about real diversity. What I want Stanford to do is appoint a new dean instead of the dean that was part of the problem here, a new dean of diversity of opinion, free speech, and tolerance. And let that dean be the one who presides over speeches of this kind, a dean who has some support for free speech and some recognition of how important it is for students to have open minds, instead of shouting down this judge, who I disagree with on most of his opinions. But that's what law school's about.
Right, but and to me, this really makes me concerned for our legal system and the judicial system when you see these students, and you want to call them kids, but they're law school students, they're adults, and they're old enough to know that they should sit there and at least listen, try to make an argument, stand and fight against what you do not believe in, and instead they just get up and walk out. And then you have the dean of diversity supporting that decision of the students to get up and walk out and not even try to engage with this judge on the opinions and on the facts of the case. Can we really have a legal system if this is what's happening in what used to be America's best law schools?
Well, it's one of America's best law schools, and it's happening at all of America's best law schools. So it's not a problem limited to Stanford. To his credit, the president of the university, who I know, has condemned what happened, and so has the dean of the law school. But now action has to be taken. The dean of diversity has to be fired. There has to be a new dean of diversity of opinion appointed. And the real question is, should the names of the students' disruptors be published so that judges make a decision whether to hire them or not? Judges have made a foolish decision, some of them saying, I won't hire anybody from Stanford. That's ridiculous. That means the students who were from the Federalist Society who brought him there would be discriminated against as well. Instead, the names of these people should be published, along with the names, for example, of the heads of student organizations at Berkeley Law School that have voted not to allow any Zionist, that is, anybody who believes Israel is the
That's such an important point, too, because at this stage of life, these young people, students, adults, whatever you want to call them, they should write a paper, too, and sign their name to it and publish it if they really want to stand behind this. But what we see here is a passive-aggressive, it is, it's this woke culture coming home to roost in our law schools, and you wonder what's down the road from this once these law students actually get out into the profession.
And they're pushed sometimes by faculty members who agree with them, or the National Lawyers Guild, who said that they want to see these kinds of disruptive protests over and over again. The National Lawyers Guild has actually published the names of people who invited this judge. And so it would ill behoove them to complain if the names of the people who disrupted were also public. People have public disruptions. They are public figures, and they should have their names published. It's not like McCarthyism, which published the names of people who had been communists 20, 30 years earlier and were living.
No, this is happening right now. The dean is encouraging this type of behavior. It's really bizarre. Judge Duncan said he described this as a bizarre therapy session from hell. But you're right. Just because even though you're liberal, everyone knows you're liberal, at least most of us know you're liberal, I doubt a lot of these students would actually look you up to know of your background. They would protest you just because you were invited by the Federalist Society. That's all they need, is just that type of information to have one of these temper tantrums.
And it's not going to help the legal profession.
No.
And the real victims are the students who wanted to hear him speak, and they were prevented from hearing him speak. Stanford ought to apologize to those students, the students who were denied the right to listen. As Thurgood Marshall said, Justice of the Supreme Court, the right to speak includes the right to listen under the First Amendment. And that right has been denied by a dean, essentially. Now, she spoke the words of freedom of speech, but essentially her message is don't invite anybody who might offend students. Particularly.
And the faculty, a lot of times, it seems like they're scared of the students. They're not leading the students; they're being led by the students. It seems like, and a lot of this stuff. Great to see you as always, and thank you for your insight as a professor, law professor, Alan Dershowitz. Great to see you.